Oh, you want me to read it? Okay. Do you think that without God, there can be a basic set of values that all human beings should have in common, such as we need to maximize human happiness? The joker in this sentence or in this question is the word should. And that expresses a moral oughtness. And in the absence of God, I see no reason to think that human beings should or have a moral duty to recognize certain things like the maximization of human happiness. And indeed, there are plenty of people in the world who don't find that a moral duty. Nazis, Afrikaner, apartheid, South Africa, colonial imperial powers, Marxists. So, no, I think that in the absence of God, there simply are no moral oughts that are absolute and imperative that all human beings have to obey. They simply become the relative byproducts of cultural conditioning and therefore are socioculturally relative.
Dr. diCarlo, response?
Oh, yes. I believe that we should make every effort to try to find out if, in fact, there are universals. I do think they can be determined to some degree. I don't really hold out much hope for absolutes. I don't. That doesn't mean I'm thrust into a sea of relativism, as Dr. Craig would maintain. I'm kind of in the middle gray area where I think what we can do is come up with proximal values. I tend to live my life according to the golden rule, fairness and justice and egalitarianism. But the golden rule did not come from Christianity or Islam or Judaism. It came from biology. It's essentially reciprocal altruism. It's the idea that what goes around comes around. So I just think it's a good idea, where possible, to try to treat people as you would, expect to be treated yourself. And that has to be tempered, though. You can't just have people like Paul Bernardo saying, "Yeah, sure, that's how I'd like to be treated." So that's, it has to be tempered. So.
All right, I would now like to call on a question directed to Dr. diCarlo. Excuse me, before you answer that, just in case everyone didn't hear, the question was directed toward diCarlo. If we are evolving, why are there still monkeys and chimpanzees around, and are we still evolving, and does he agree or disagree that the world is, in fact, getting worse rather than better?
Right. Well, I mean, very quickly, there's going to be chimps and bonobos and macaques and things like that. We went our way. Hominins, we went our way. Common ancestor to the chimpanzee, and the chimps went their way. Could they become more human-like in the future? Perhaps, but that would depend on evolutionary pressures and an enormous amount of time. Don't forget, at one point, we were not alone. I mean, just 30,000 years ago, there was us, Homo sapiens, there was Florenziensis, there was Erectus, and there was Neanderthal. Neanderthal disappeared about 30,000 years ago when Cro-Magnon moved into Western Europe, more than likely intercepted, met up with them, killed them, and in some cases, ate them. So that's evolution red in tooth and claw. Shouldn't things be getting better rather than getting worse? I really don't know what that means. In terms prior to cultural evolution, prior to our ability to culturally affect our environments, in terms of biology, evolution is going nowhere, and rather slowly at that. Evolution can lead to greater complexity or it can lead to greater simplicity. It all depends on the environmental constraints and the allele or the gene frequencies through any given population.
I think the question betrays a misunderstanding of evolutionary theory. The theory does not hold that we evolved from chimpanzees or monkeys. The theory holds that monkeys, chimpanzees, the great apes, and human beings evolved from a common primate ancestor. And therefore, it's not surprising that there would still be monkeys and chimpanzees around us, as well as human beings.
I agree.
Right.
Good to see some agreement can be reached. So now I would call on a second question directed towards Dr. Craig. I'll go with the first hand, the very back row in the hat. The question was just seeking clarification on Dr. Craig's part, whether or not he said that absolute understanding of the existence of God was possible.
Yeah, I was responding to Dr. diCarlo's PowerPoint where he said Craig claims he is absolutely certain and provides insight into reality. And what I said was simply that I don't claim absolute certainty. I'm not saying that for some people they don't feel absolutely certain. I'm just not making that claim myself. My claim is much more modest. I would say, for example, that it's more probable than not that God exists. So I'm not making those sorts of strong claims.
And to me, generally, the experience with those who are religious is they tend to get up in the morning and maintain that their answers to the big five are fairly solid. I would imagine you would maintain your beliefs, Dr. Craig, with a fairly high level of probability.
Excuse me,
Would you maintain that your beliefs about God are fairly highly probable, or?
I don't know how to estimate that. I mean,
so could you just as likely be wrong?
Excuse me?
Could you just as likely be wrong?
No, I said I thought it was more probable than not. But
So,
when you
all
talk
right.
about high probability, I mean, how do you measure this?
How
kind
do
of
you
thing?
measure it?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you
It's-
measure that?
It's very,
Give me
very
that. Give me that
nebulous.
reality measuring stick, and this debate is over.
All right, with that, I'll lead off to a question directed towards Dr. DiCarlo. Thank you. The question was asking, do we have a moral responsibility to address moral errors that we do not necessarily encounter in our daily lives, such as genocide in Darfur, injustices dealing with the natives in North America, etc.?
Yeah, I think to some degree, but only so insofar as we can, right? Like odd implies can. So if we can't really help those people, then I don't think there's a moral imperative to help them. So what moral obligation? I was in Toronto yesterday at a play, and right outside the theater is a homeless person asking for money. What moral obligation does that homeless person have to help the genocide that's happening in Darfur? Well, he's just trying to make it through to the next day. And the same thing, I think, can be extended outward to us, to the rest of us as well. I think you've got to pretty much take care of what you can at home first. Make sure you and your family and the people you care about in your community is looked after. And then it can radiate outwards from there. Christ said there will always be poor. There will always be suffering. And it seems no matter what we do and no matter how hard we try to eradicate the injustices of the world, you still get situations where they keep cropping up. And we want them to stop, but we're sometimes prevented due to sometimes political ideology, sometimes due to resources and whatnot. And it's incredibly complex. And it would be so nice if we could just wave our hand, or if some great being could wave its hand and make everything all right. And I'm still waiting. So I'll try to do what I can, and you try to do what you can.
It's a fascinating debate where the atheist is quoting Christ and the Christian is quoting Nietzsche. But I would basically agree with that. I think that Jesus' parable of the Great Samaritan especially teaches that all people are our neighbor. And so the commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, Jesus said, extends to all people. What I don't agree with is that on atheism or naturalism we would have any sort of moral responsibilities because moral duties and values are simply illusory on a naturalistic view. But certainly from a theistic perspective we have such a responsibility.